Brother Joe Briggs, we'll turn it over to you.
Okay. That's it. Yeah, it's good to be back again. I hope I can inspire you just a little bit like I did the last time. And this is a historical thing. And I realized at the time that what a story. And this is something that I didn't realize till I sat down and thought about it, that, well, these dates are so important, and in our country, we should know more about them. Now, the last time I spoke to you, we talked about the Native Americans that were here in 12,000 BC. Well, this is a continuation of that. Only we're going to start now at 1500 AD. And we're going to go to 1890. Now, in 1890, all the Native Americans are in reservations. But we got to start out someplace where they come into United States or North America, and who comes first? Spain. We all know about Columbus, but do we know about what happened? The plague. The plague. The plague is here, and the pox. And it influences everything that is going to be in North America for 400 years. So let's start out with the plague. The Spanish are here. They're making their moves. They come in with trades, and they come in with their slavery, and they bring in the plague, and it will start from the peninsula of, which is Florida, and that's where they land. These explorers are not cognizant of much going on, but they're coming in small groups. And they don't realize that they're impregnating these people with the disease that will stay with them for 400 years. Well, in 1500 is a memorable time, but let's take two explorers that we know of, and one would be Ponce de Leon, and the other would be Fernando de Soto. And Fernando de Soto was convinced that there was lots of gold in Florida, as the same as Ponce de Leon. Well, Ponce came first, and he had one heck of a time with the Indians that were here already. But he didn't care anything else about only gold and slavery, and they were bringing religion into North America. And that would be Catholic relations, and they brought priests, and they brought friars, and they had expeditions, and they traveled all over Florida inward. And Ponce did first. He was looking for the fountain of youth along with everything else, but he was a total failure, and he died with an arrowhead in his body. It was poisoned by one of the natives. He died in Cuba. He did absolutely nothing but cruelty and bringing the plague to North America. Well, Hernando, he lands on the Gulf of Mexico, and with a large expedition of people, then he convinced the king of Spain. He said, "I'll finance the trip myself, and because I know there's gold there." Well, he finally got his stuff together, and after a year he landed in Tampa, approximately where it would be Tampa. And he too was going to convert these Indians to the Catholic religion. And he traveled inward and all the way up to Arkansas, all the way down to Mississippi, all the way down, and it just absolutely ravaged the countryside. And he really didn't promote anything. And in the end, he died 100 miles from where he started. Of the 600 people, 300 of them made it back. Well, this gives you a little picture of the peninsula. And we're going to talk about the peninsula of Florida a little bit because it's a key thing. The reason we talk about it in Florida and the East Coast actually is more people lived in that area than anywhere else in the United States. And so the plains were people out there. There's plenty of people west, but there just wasn't the inhabitants living like they lived in from, say, Tennessee all the way down to Florida toe. All right, so now we have approximately 1542. That's the end of Hernando. He died, and they buried him in Mississippi. So the Native Americans were not converted. But in comes France, and they think, well, we'll do the same thing. And it just didn't work out any better for the French. So now you've got Spain, you've got France, and now you've got the British that are on the East Coast. Now we're going to move a little bit over to the center of North America and all of the eastern coast. Well, we all know that 1609, approximately, Jamestown was founded by the British, and the Plymouth, well, that's a little different. They bought their land. And they paid $12 million for all the land that they got in 1620. So the stories you hear about Thanksgiving, well, they move. Those dates move around according to the way they wanted to write it. It's the same way with Jamestown. It's a very romantic thing. We all know about Pocahontas and so on. But the dates were actually 1623. So we're moving right along. The Indians, we call them now the Indians or the Native Americans, AKA Indians, were still prevalent. The chaos was starting to move across. And the only reason that they're having the chaos is because of the incursion, and we have the plague. We have the plague again. It absolutely consumes most of the time. They just have no resistance to the pox or the plague. So we now have the dates. We're moving right along, and the British now are very interested in the Florida situation, and so the British are starting to enter. But the British are doing all of these stuff in the East Coast. They're landing, they're making colonies. The King George III, he's smiling. He says, "Oh, things are working real light. I'm going to make this country, North America, I'm going to make it a part of England." And so I think that's his whole idea, and he's just sitting back and smiling. But anyway, we have the incursions that are happening, and the incursions are the settlers. The British have their settlers, the colonists now are starting on their inhabitation. The 13 states are starting to mold into what we call United States. So things are moving right along. And it's now where the Indians are just being more or less understanding that, well, we've got to do something, and they're coming back with raids and so on. But they haven't stopped the heavy concentration of people coming in. But now here it is. It's 1673. The French and Indian War really takes on. Now, what the French and Indian War does is just open up a can of worms all along the East Coast. We have a complete change of venue. A complete change of venue. So the French, they side with the, you all heard of The Last of the Mohegans. That's the book that was written by early writers, and but anyhow, the French side with the Mohegans and the Hurons, and the British have the Iroquois Confederation, and they've been the Iroquois, or the part of the Mohawk. It's the Mohawk that joined the Iroquois Confederation. So they in turn defeat, and that the Hurons are defeated, and as a result, the Indians now are starting to move from the East Coast down toward the middle of the United States or North America. And believe me or not, they're coming down, and the Wyandots and the Delawares and all the rest of them have been in chaos because of all the incursions of the both British and colonists, and also the regular colonists. Okay, so now we have what we call a lookabout, and King George is sitting there just smiling, and he's saying, "Oh well, these colonists are getting out of control." And he said, I'm fighting Napoleon over here. So he said, we need taxes. Well, you've got to realize that when you start taxing, we all know what happened to the eve of the Revolutionary War. And we do have the eve of the Revolutionary War, and it's what we call 1775. But 1776 is our Declaration of Independence. Well, then we have a war. We have the leaders. We're fortunate we had good leaders, but the war started in 1776. So the 1776 to 1783, we had the war. Things were going on the same, incursion onto the Indian lands. We had the worst plague that we had another plague in 1778, just whittled down the North American Indians, whittled them down. At the same time, they're still fighting and losing their land more and more and more. Well, the Revolutionary War, what does it do? it takes everything, and we win. The colonists win. King George is sitting there thinking, well, how can this happen? How could these red-tailed colonists beat my redcoats? But anyhow, we know they did. And Britain lost everything they had in North America as far as land. So now you've got the what we call the Treaty of 1783. The treaty says that everything that the British have is now United States. Well, this is a big move. This is a big move. The United States is not only that, it's just gained. And it gained everywhere. So if you stop and think that only Britain ended up with Canada and an Ontario area with a couple forts on it and trading posts. So getting back to Florida, the Peninsula, we had the Spanish, we had the French, and now we have the United States looking at this more closely. The British are in there. They made colonies all along the coast in North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and so on. So they're moving along, but they lost all that area. They don't have anything now. So that's why the United States is back in the groove. Okay, at this period, it's well to know that the 1650, 1700, the Native Americans were enjoying you might say the mobility of the horse. I want to bring that out to you because without the horse, you couldn't do what they did. And they were so superior in raising horses and absolutely mastering the horse in every type of position he could be in. And this would favor those people for a long, long, long time. You probably remember the beautiful horses that you see painted. And these horses were wild, and they were running in herds at this time between 1650 and 1700. The Andalusian and the paint horse and the plains and the Andalusians in the Atlantic area where they landed originally. These peoples, especially the Comanches on that part of the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, on the warriors, they mastered the horse and bred the horse. So I just want to bring it into you. That's where the horse came in. They were wild herds. Okay, so now we have what we call minor wars, but the Revolutionary War just still had fighting going on because of the incursions that were going on. They were illegal, but nobody seemed to do anything, and the U.S. Army didn't do anything. There was fighting going on now in New Orleans. There was fighting going on, and the United States went out there and they beat France. But if you look now at from 1783 at the peace talks, things are moving along. The next thing you have is after 1783 would be the movement to the mid-America, and guess what? That would be Ohio. And Ohio was what we call a chunk deal. And we had a treaty in 1795 at Greenville, right here in Ohio, a treaty in Greenville. And what it did is they gave all the land that they needed, and whether it was really fair or not, it happened. So in 1795 we had, you might say, Ohio was born, and it was. And the Wyandottes and the Delawares and the Kickapoos, and they signed it, and they did it because they were suffering so bad from being fought by tribes and other confederations such as the Iroquois, which were dominant after the French and Indian War. So you've got a situation now that's really developing from 1795. Now, Ohio was already dominated by settlers, 200,000. So when they were going to be a state in 1803, that became the 17th state, or Ohio became the 17th states of the United States. 1803, we now have Ohio as a state. At that same time, 1803 was a big year because Lewis and Clark were on their way west, and we had we bought from France in the Louisiana Purchase all the land they had for $15 million. $15 million, and they bought all this land from France that they had accumulated. So the United States moved into a key position, and they now had total control of the Florida Peninsula. So we're done with the Florida Peninsula at this time, except that Osceola and the Seminoles were still there, and as you know, they never did give up. And the reason they didn't give up because they had black brothers, and the black brothers were not accepted as Indians for the reservation. That comes a little bit later. So that's why they fought and fought. And the land was all taken away from in a fraudulent deal in Florida. It was fraudulent, there's no question about it. But that wasn't settled till we fought the Seminoles clear up to 1840. Well, so now we move now to the plains, and it's 1849. Does anybody know what 1849 is?
Gold Rush.
The gold rush. Number one, the gold rush. Signs in the cities: go west, young man, stake a claim and gain your fame. And this started out all over North America. So you got the strike one is very important because the incursions now were just unbelievable. The poor little, the Indians, they say, well, you're crossing our territory. We haven't, well, what treaty? We don't know anything about a treaty, the miners would say, or the settlers. We don't know anything about that. And the U.S. Army would turn their arm back like this way because secretly they sort of wanted to get the Indians in the reservations. And so we have the strike. And you might say that the West was now in a chaos. and it was. You had the Sioux Nations. The Sioux Nations were fighting in between themselves. The Chippewas, you got so many, the Blackfeet were mortal enemies, and then they're fighting. Now they're coming together because they realize if they don't come together, they're not going to survive. Well, just about this time, what happens? We got another strike, 1858. And where is the strike? Pikes Peak, Colorado. Well, that caused incursions that you couldn't believe. This army was building forts now to protect the settlers, so it just wasn't conducive to their liking. But again, strike two would end up where the natives decided we've got to unite. We've got to unite, or we're not going to be here. So you get Sitting Bull, and you get some of the high chiefs, Chief Joseph in the Canadian area, and you get Crazy Horse. And Crazy Horse had a reputation as a technical advisor. So let's say that they unite now. So they do unite, and it would come from the middle about whereby you have 15,000 Native Americans. There would be like a belt right across the center of North America, right through beyond Ohio a little bit. So we got strike two. There is intermittent fighting continually, but the thing to look at is how much longer can they survive. They've already killed the buffalo. I called it a grocery on hoofs. And the grocery on hoofs furnished all the food for centuries of these Native Americans. The buffalo, absolutely 80% was consumed. Well, the army didn't pay much attention. They were building forts, they were building trails, and they were shooting the buffalo for fun. So we have that situation now. And the trains are coming from Portland, from all the way across. So it's just that they're whittling down this whole, you might say, the whole population of North American natives. When they started out with approximately 2 million, they're going to end up with only like 500,000. And so many have died from the plague. It's just impossible. One plague from Mexico all the way to Canada just decimated the tribes. What can we look at now? The incursions are not being stopped. The natives are in total disarray. And just about this time, what happens? We have a third gold strike. And it's in the Black Hills of Montana. And the government said, well, we'll do this, we'll do that. And they put the proposition, we'll buy out the, and the answer was no, hell no, we won't sell. Because it was sacred ground for long. And so the Sioux, who really headed up the thing, because they had the largest confederation, said, well, we won't sell. What does the U.S. Army say? Or probably come directly from our president, who knows? But they said, well, we're going to go in there and we got to protect the settlers. We got to do it. So Sitting Bull, he said, well, I'll fight. So they put a plan up. And the plan is, well, we've been fighting the army, and there's only one thing we can do. We can bloody their nose, and if we bloody their nose, maybe they won't do what they're doing. They all agreed. And they had the force now. They had 15,000 Native Americans, and they were warriors. And they were out to prove that they could stand up before the U.S. Army. Well, we just got through with the Civil War, and it's 1861 to 65. It's over with, but the ranks are filled now with soldiers from the Civil War, and you look around and you say, well. Custer, he's the man we need, all right. So anyhow, George Armstrong Custer is put in charge of the 7th Cavalry. Well, the Indians, or the North American, they draw up a contract, and they said if they go beyond this point, we will have to fight. Well, make a long story short, they went beyond the point, which was Rosebud. It was called Rosebud in Montana. And the spies that we had that were working, the Pawnees, the Crows, and so on, were American scouts. So they started out, and sure enough, they went to the Rosebud, where Crazy Horse said, if they go by there, we're going to have to fight. And of course, they did fight. And, but it was just a bloody nose thing. So this army says they won, and the Indians said, we won. but they went on, and Custer was a very heroic, because in the Civil War, and he wanted to prove himself again that he's the leader. There's only one thing wrong with that. He got a little too anxious. And the 7th Cavalry was split up, and his plan was absolutely something we don't know to this day what happened. But anyway, when Crazy Horse saw that he was deploying his army in an area where it could actually be surrounded, that was it. He said, I can't believe it. And what happened? He did. He surrounded him, and it was a total wipeout. And we had the massacre of George Armstrong Custer. Well, it's rah for the Indians, but was it a victory? They themselves said, well, we know that the U.S. Army is going to come after us with vengeance. The date is 1886. And really, this, you might say, ended the domination of the Native Americans. They had suffered so bad, but they would be on the run now for several years. And there's not much you could do. Technically, you might say the war was over. But anyway, they were on the run, and they did. And one by one, they would come in and say, I'm tired of running. I'm sick. My people are sick. And that was Chief Joseph. And that was in 1887 or 8. and they came in and went to the reservation. So now you've got probably 60–70% of all the Native Americans now in reservations. So that the job is done, you might say. But in the meantime, the United States says, well, we're going to have a gold rush, a land rush, and they start having a land rush and giving away Indian territory that was already occupied again. And they said, first come, first serve. And on a certain day at a certain time, they would shoot a gun and away they'd go. And you'd have a land rush. And these are in the closing days. It's already 1890. 1890. So the last land rush, it was just a fiasco. But anyhow, it's 1890. Guess what? The United States is the victor of the North American natives. They are declared now that they have total control, and the natives are in reservations. Yes, that's true. They now have the privilege of taking care of the native Indians for the rest of their life, as it is today. Just today, the same. You have to take care of them the rest of your life. Well, that is technically the finale. But in 1924, the United States made every native a citizen of the United States. And that they were proven to be very distinguished individuals ever since. In World War I, they were distinguished. In World War II, they were distinguished. They were fighting people that contributed to, especially the Navajo. The Navajo, and you probably remember the talkers, the code talkers at Iwo Jima, Mount Suribachi. They were in the pictures there, holding the flag up. So they have contributed so much to the United States. That is the end of my story, and I hope I selected the dates that give you a better picture of the fate of the North American natives. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer.
I have a question, Joe. You said that there were approximately 2 million Native Americans estimated here when we came over.
Yeah.
Do you, by any chance, do you have, and it decimated down to about 500,000?
Yeah.
Do you have any idea today what the reservations, how many Native Americans still live in their own territory? I'm sure we have plenty in society, but do you have any idea what the numbers are for just reservation residents?
I don't know, but I do know that every state has a reservation. I know Ohio doesn't. Yeah. I don't know, but I just know that there's reservations every place, you know. But I would say that their population is up now. Yeah.
Sure.
They even contribute 45,000 people in World War II, even though their population was down. Yeah. They were, you might say they inherited the stealth and the fierceness that you would need in battle. They inherited that because they were very crafty people. And it's maybe because they lived outdoors and everything. But their horseback riding was any position, especially the Comanches. You know, you can read about that. And this stealth would extend to the stealing of horses. Stealing of horses was a merit badge, like a scouting. If you're good at that, boy, you had everything you needed. You get a credit for being a stealth person or crafty, for being that way, you know. It raises your standard. And if you got more than one horse, you could have more than one wife, you see. They give a lot of awards for that stuff, yeah. Yeah, it was traded just like money. A horse was the most valuable thing. The status was raised up. So but they were whittled down and whittled down. But now they've made a comeback, I'm sure now. Anything else?
Nice. Thanks for everything.
Well, we want to thank you for the presentation.
Yeah, that's kind of busy.
You're
And if
welcome.
there's no other questions, why we have an attitude of, yeah.
May I get a picture of you, Joe, for our club?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
We have an attitude of prayer, please. May the blessing of heaven rest upon us on all regular holy 12 hymns. May brotherly love prevail, and every moral and social virtue cement us. Amen.
Let me, very interesting.